that there's this protest movement is precisely because of the perception, what I think is the obviously accurate and even overdue perception, that meaningful political change is not going to be effectuated any longer by working in the political process, by working in the electoral partisan system. And I think that what has happened that has probably been the biggest motivator of this protest movement was that there are a huge number of people who got convinced by the Obama message of 2008. I mean, they targeted on purpose people who were deeply cynical about the political process and who had either never participated before or had stopped participating. And the message was, you have this corrosive cynicism, and I understand it. You believe that there is no value in working for candidates or in the political process, but I have this message for you. The message is, yes, we can, the audacity of hope, targeting people to put aside their cynicism and to believe that true change could happen by working for the Democratic Party. And what has happened is huge numbers of people came to realize that in essence they were defrauded, that was a sham. Ironically, he has done more as a result to intensify cynicism than anyone else could have done, because there are huge numbers of people who decided they were going to believe in this for once and now believe, well, if it didn't happen then, it's never going to happen. I'm never going to get tricked again. And essentially, I think there's just
I think I'm one of them.
Yeah, and I think there are, you have a lot of company, and many of them are out protesting. I mean, I think that in general, what is true is that political change can be effectuated through two ways, just roughly speaking. One is you work within the prevailing political and legal institutions to do it. You work for candidates, you devote yourself to a political party, you try and elect new leaders, you bring lawsuits, you try and enforce the law. But the problem is that once the political and legal institutions become sufficiently corrupted, once the outcome no longer matters because the various political parties are co-opted by and captive to the same set of narrow, powerful interests, then what citizens conclude is that the only viable way to effectuate political change is by going out into the streets and demanding it, and creating social unrest and disruption. The reason why people in Arab countries didn't effectuate political change by working within the democratic process is because there was no democratic process for them to work into, so they did the only thing they could, which is go out into the streets and uproot society and demand change. And I think that is, more than anything else, what the people who are on the street are concluding. They are not there to elect the Democratic Party. They are there to express anger and dissent over the political system. They're not there to demand specific pieces of legislation that just get put into that corrosive political system. They're there to demand fundamental change in our political culture, and that's why I think it's so effective and so inspiring.
That said, do you think the Occupy movement, though, does now at this point need to develop a more definite political strategy?
I'm a little bit hesitant to tell the Occupy movement what I think it should do, just because in part I think that what they've done so far has been perfect. And probably the smartest thing that they've done is resolutely ignore all the advice that people have been trying to give it. And in particular, the idea that, for example, they formulate these legislative demands and these pretty PowerPoint presentations, something that lots of people sympathetic, ostensibly at least, to what they were doing, were demanding of them. That was essentially a way that media figures were trying to force them to speak the language of media organizations and the prevailing political discourse so that it could be more easily controlled and pigeonholed and dismissed. And I think that it was brilliant not to do that, because not only did it prevent the media from then getting a hold of it and forcing it into a box, but it also made it so that people across the ideological spectrum who were dissenting from the prevailing political order felt welcome and opened. And I think that ought to continue. And what I really think that has been the biggest strength of the Occupy movement is that it has been extremely organic. It is nothing more than what the people who go there each and every day choose for it to be. And what they have been choosing for it to be is this space of genuine dissent. And I think it's achieved great good. I think it's forced issues of inequality into the media discourse. For me, a watershed moment was about a week ago. I was traveling and therefore very involuntarily subjected to the painful horrors of CNN on some airplane.
It's compulsory in airports.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot escape it.
It's Orwellian.
Yeah, it is. And on this screen was David Gergen, who, for me, for a long time I didn't even believe he existed. I thought he was just like a committee hologram there to like channel conventional wisdom of the establishment. And he may still be. I'm not convinced that I'm wrong about that.
A floating head.
Yeah, exactly. And he was on there and he was talking with, that panel that he talks to or whatever. And what he said was they were talking about the Occupy protest movement, and he said, and something along the lines of, I think that income inequality is perhaps an issue that merits some attention. Now, and it was very tentative like that. It was like, I think that maybe at some point in the near future we might want to start thinking about
within proper channels, right?
Yeah, as long as it's done in accordance with the rules. But the fact that David Gergen actually talked about the severe income inequality plaguing the United States is, almost a revolutionary act. And it is...
It's the Walter Cronkite Vietnam moment.
Right. Instead of, we need austerity and it's time to cut social programs because these people have too much. It was... And it's the direct byproduct of the protest movement. And I think the even bigger value, and it's what you referred to earlier when you told the story about Andrew Ross Sorkin and the mystical call that he got from some unnamed banking CEO, right. Jamie Dimon or whomever, who was calling and basically saying, is this something we should fear? I think that what the Occupy protest movement has done is the most valuable thing, which is it is finally putting fear into the hearts of political and financial elites.
Well, and the B of A today did announce, the Bank of America did announce, no more $5 debit fee. So,
right. And that's symbolic. I mean, it really is true. Interestingly, tycoons and barons and the like used to really be afraid of what the citizenry would do if it was perceived that they became too greedy, or that's why John Rockefeller used to famously ride down the street throwing coins at the crowds, and lots of then millionaires would keep safes full of their valuables in a ship off the coast so they could escape in the event there was a socialist revolution.
Do you think
that's a healthy fear? We want them to have that fear, and they've not had that fear, and that's been one of the biggest problems.
Do you think the moment when Donald Trump goes down to Zuccotti Park and starts tossing change to the crowd, is that going to be a turning point?
I mean, we're far from, I hope, being that cheap of a date where, a few crumbs from the table are going to be sufficient. I've spent a lot of time with protesters over the last 10 days, and I'm going to be doing it more over the next week or week and a half, talking at various protest movements, and I'm pretty confident in saying that Donald Trump throwing a few coins or things like it are not going to make those very passionate and inspiring people go away. So I think a lot more is going to have to be done. Okay.
Now, because it's San Francisco, Glenn, we go into briefly, before we open it up to questions from, I'm sure, this very interesting and astute crowd, the Oprah phase of the interview. I'm going to ask you a couple personal questions, if I might. You've chosen to live in Brazil in recent years. We know one reason. Your partner, David, here is Brazilian. But how does living in a kind of exile, in a way, from the imperial center, let's say, affect the way that you look at the world?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's not so much of a choice to live in Brazil because essentially the Brazilian government grants immigration rights to my partner and to me based on our spousal relationship, like most civilized countries in the world do now, which means we're able to live together there with my getting a permanent visa, whereas the United States government refuses to recognize our relationship for any legal purposes, including immigration purposes. So it's the only place where we can live together. But I think that, although the injustice is extreme and infuriating, for me, I have the best situation. I happen to have a career where I can live in another place. Thousands of people in this position end up in horrible situations, living illegally, having to live in a place where they can't work, or having to live thousands of miles apart from the person with whom they want to spend their life. But there have been lots of benefits, I think, to being a political writer and the like. one is that, first of all, going through that experience that I just described makes you, I think, more empathetic to what happens when rights are violated of other people. I think there's a big benefit to having your rights violated in such a fundamental way, because it makes you realize that these are not abstract issues, that these impact people's lives in very tangible ways, and I think increase the passion to work on them. I also think that living in another country gives you a sense of your own country's role in the world and how it's perceived and how it impacts other people, and just the differences. So for example, one of the first things that I noticed when I started living in Brazil full time, it just dawned on me one day, is that there's never a time when you turn on the television or open up a newspaper and there's a discussion about which countries should be bombed. Like it doesn't. It's not part of the discourse. It's not part of the thought pattern.
Right.
It's just never an option that is on the table. And you know that, and the contrast between that and basically opening up the paper and the suspense of the day being which country, new country we bombed today. I think does give you a sense for just how kind of extreme that behavior is. It's just an example of, there's this fascinating psychological study from NASA that astronauts in the early NASA stage who went to the moon and looked at the Earth from outside of the Earth rather than being immersed in it had all kinds of unexpected psychological afflictions, because it fundamentally alters your perspective to look at a place from outside of it. Obviously, moving to Rio de Janeiro is not quite the same as going to the moon in that regard, but it does alter how you view a certain place. You tend to see the world in a kind of more holistic way rather than with you at the center. And then the final benefit, I think, is that one of the reasons why journalism, I think, has become so corrupted and why independent journalism is so crucial is because so many journalists are so dependent in so many ways on this kind of power corridor in the New York, Washington media axis. Those are their friends, those are their social colleagues, they go to parties with those people, and even more subtly, but maybe more insidiously, they're kind of hooked into that form of thought. And we're all human, we all absorb things by osmosis. Being removed from all of that, having my friends and associates and colleagues not be media stars and political figures in New York and Washington, purposely keeping a distance from those people, I think enables me to have a sense of independence, a sort of indifference to offending people in power on some level, maybe even to do so.
I.F. Stone just stayed away from the parties in Washington, but you moved halfway around the world. That's even more of a commitment to your integrity. Final question, Glenn, before we do open it up. I was at a dinner party the other night talking to a group of people, and we were all talking about a turning point in our lives when it really set us on the course that we followed for the rest of our lives. And for me, it was being in military school in Los Angeles, where I grew up during the Vietnam War. And, starting to speak out against it as a kid and having sort of these mini dictators who ran the school coming down on me like a ton of bricks. And, just seeing that authority wasn't always what you wanted it to be and what you wanted to respect. For you, growing up gay in Florida, suburban Florida, in the 90s, right? You're that young. No, at some point.
Close.
Was there a moment for you when you realized, I can't just follow the straight and narrow path, so to speak, and that made you who you are today? The warrior for truth?
I got into trouble once because in this interview that I gave to Out Magazine, I was talking about my admiration for Bradley Manning. And my admiration is grounded in the courageous acts that he knowingly committed if he did what he's accused of having done, and if you believe the chat logs and the reasons why he did them. And one of the things that I had said was that I thought that his being gay was probably an advantage in the sense that when you grow up already excluded from the prevailing order, you essentially have to find a way to create your own order. And you're much more critically scrutinizing of it because it's rejected you. You might even tend to sort of be hostile to it and more willing to engage in combat against it. And, you know, some people suggested, well, you've now just given a reason why the military shouldn't let gay people into
Exactly.
into the service. And
That's
maybe
why they were so careful about it.
But, you know, actually, for me, the most formative experience that I had, you know, politically was that when I first started writing about politics in the end of 2005, I was aware that